Good morning, everybody, and Tony, thanks for organizing the symposium. I'm going to be moving things away from the molecular to a discussion of a kinship that I've been studying for the last 10 years called virtual twins. So the title of the talk is Virtual Twin Studies, What Do They Tell Us About Human Behavior? So first of all, what are virtual twins? These are same-age, unrelated children raised together. And what they do is they replay the twin relationship without the genetic link. So they give us a pure estimate of environmental influence on behavior. They come in two varieties. They can be two adopted children who come into the family at the same point in time, or one adopted child and one biological child that's been in the family. Now, I've developed some very strict rules for who I allow into the study, and I won't go through the rationale for each of them at this moment, but just to tell you what these rules are. Both unrelated siblings have to be reared together before 1 year of age. The minimum acceptable age of testing is 4 years, and the maximum acceptable age difference is 9 months. But as you'll see, the difference is a lot less than that. School-age siblings must be enrolled in the same grade at the time of testing to preserve the twin-like nature of the relationship, and pairs in which one or both partners have experienced any sort of birth trauma or serious difficulty have been excluded from the study. Some other guidelines: I do accept opposite-sex siblings because you can have opposite-sex dizygotic twins. And I also take children who are unrelated and of different ethnicities because there are a number of pairs born to parents of different ethnicities who themselves produce twins who look like they come from different ethnic groups. So when I identify qualified families, the parents receive by mail a demographic data form, the child behavior checklist, an adjective checklist, the age-appropriate sibling inventory of differential experience, and each child is independently given a Wechsler IQ test at the same time by different examiners. Over the years, I've added a personality checklist, a medical and dental history, a creativity questionnaire, and an adoption health history. So who are some of the virtual twins? The girls you see there are an adopted biological pair 4 months apart in age, and those little boys are both adopted at 2.5 months apart. But they come about in other ways. This is a set of triplets, the little boy on the left and the two over on the right, and an adopted child who was 5 months older. And with families like this, you can actually pair the adoptee with each of the triplets for 3 sets of virtual twins. And I have a number of families like this. Now, I have a total of 142 virtual twin pairs at this time, the majority being adopted. But there is a substantial minority of the adopted biological form. The majority of each type happen to be boy-girl twins, or boy-girl virtual twins. And they come about in some exotic ways, and I'll just share with you what a recent finding. A same-sex couple, 2 women, each gave birth to their own child with different fathers, and each of those mothers adopted the child of their partner. So it took a bit of a trick to classify them appropriately, but we finally decided on a biological adopted pair. So some descriptive characteristics. The age difference is 3.22 months, although it does range from 0 to 9. The age of testing is 7, as young as 4, but I do have some older pairs, so the oldest virtual twin pair are 54 years old. The test interval in days is 4. Now, most of the twins are tested on the same day. However, due to the hospitalization of one pair, we had to test them 255 days apart. The age of adoption in days is just under 2 months for the adopted children, and the number of previous living situations is under 1, but as large as 8 in 1 or 2 cases. Most of the parents are somewhat older on average and mostly professional types, as is expected for parents who adopt children. Now, the age of testing, the older children do tend to do a little bit better in IQ, verbal IQ, and performance IQ. More interesting is pair type. Children from adopted biological pairs tend to do better. Not a great deal better, but they do tend to do better, and I'm going to come back to that finding a little bit later. The age at which children enter families, that is, age at adoption or age at release from the hospital, is also associated with IQ performance. That is, kids who come into the family earlier tend to do better, probably because they're more healthy at the time. And the other variables, with the exception of birth order, but really a minor effect, sex and ethnicity or race, had no effect. The older pairs tend to have a smaller IQ difference, and that makes sense because children tend to get less and less alike in IQ when they're unrelated as they approach adolescence. None of the other measures had any effect. The only one of interest has to do with classroom placement, and that is that children in the same classroom at the time of testing tend to have smaller verbal IQ differences and smaller IQ differences. Again, but it's a cause and effect relationship here. It could be the kids who are more alike are put into the same classroom. And that's mirrored in the last measure, which is the percent of years you're in the same classroom. The longer you're together, the more alike you are. But again, it's a cause and effect association. Now, the mean IQ of the kids is about 105, somewhat above average, very, very typical for volunteer adoptive families. The range is 70 to 148. The interclass correlation is 0.28. That tells us that 0.28% or 28% of the variance in IQ is associated with shared environmental factors, the remainder being genetic and non-shared environment. The mean difference in IQ for the kids is 12.7. That's above what you would find for dizygotic twins, which is about 10. It's probably not as high as what you expect for unrelated individuals, which is closer to 17. But those would be adults who've never lived together. These are children living together in the same home, so that common environment is going to reduce the difference somewhat. Let me just call your attention here to the profile correlation. That's the patterning of spurts and lags or strengths and weaknesses across the various IQ subtests. And that is 0.45 for the MZ twins. This is a group of twins I studied many years ago, so I've got some comparative data here. 0.24 for dizygotic twins and just 0.11 for the virtual twins. And if you look at the variance due to pair concordance, that's 60% for the MZ twins, 29% for the DZ twins, and only 17% for the virtual twins. Now let me come back to the biological adopted pairs, because I think that's really the most interesting subgroup within this entire sample. The mean IQ of the biological siblings is significantly higher than for the adoptive siblings, 113 versus 104, and there is a significant correlation with rearing status and IQ. That's not terribly surprising because parents who adopt children, who have biological children of their own, tend to be financially secure, more intelligent, etc., whereas adopted children tend to be from more heterogeneous backgrounds. So this is a finding that has been replicated. Looking just now at the 49 biological adoptive sets and looking at the signed IQ difference, that's 7.41, and the biological children have an IQ of 113, the adopted of 105.6. These are just the within pair differences for the non-signed difference, the absolute difference, 13.47 for the adopted adopteds and 11.25 for the adopted biological. Now, this is kind of a surprising set of findings, although I think I'm starting to make a little sense of it, but I would welcome any comments from anyone in the audience. What I've done here is to organize the pairs by adopted, adopted, adopted biological. And you see that for my study and for several previous ones, the IQ correlation is quite small. But for the adopted biological kids in my study, it's 0.47, which is approaching that of full siblings and dizygotic twins, much higher than you would expect for unrelated siblings. But I noticed that for Horn's et al. Study in 1982, their children from 5 to 7 also showed the exact same correlation. But when they looked at the children who were 8 years and above, then the correlation began to drop. So I think that's probably the effect that I'm getting there. The other thing, of course, is that the environment of the adoptee is correlated with the genotype of the biological child. So there's a component of variance there in those sets that's not shared in the adopted families. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also the case when adopted children are followed longitudinally, the difference between them tends to magnify such that when they get to be adolescents, the correlation is close to 0. Okay, in the 2 or 3 minutes I have left, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other work I've done with virtual twins in collaboration with Dr. Shirley McGuire, who was at the University of San Francisco, not the University of San Diego. And we have a study that's called TAPS, which has been in progress since 2003. It refers to twins, adoptees, peers, and siblings. And it's a very comprehensive behavioral genetic design. When we find qualified families, they complete a 2 to 3 hour in-home assessment, a series of interviews, intelligence testing, videotaping of structured activities, and telephone interviews. And what I'll share with you this morning are the results from our peer overlap study, which is in press in Channel Development. What we have each sibling do independently is to list the names of friends and then to indicate how many friends they have in common. We bring them back together again, and they have to reach agreement on the common friends that they have. And then the measure we compute is the number of common friends divided by the number of total peers. And this next slide simply shows the sibling agreement in shared friends, and it's quite high across the different kinships, ranging from 0.60 to 0.81. At first, the distribution of correlation was a bit surprising here because I would have expected much higher agreement in the monozygotic twins, till I thought about this a little bit, and it could be that when you're a virtual twin or a full sibling, and you probably have very different friends here, as you'll see in the next slide, it may be quite clear who's a friend and who's not a friend that's shared. So agreement may be easier to obtain. Whereas with monozygotic twins who probably share more friends and maybe partially share friends, it may be less clear as to who's really a common friend, which may account for why their agreement is somewhat lower. Now here you can see the peer network overlap percentage goes just about hand in glove with genetic relatedness, being the highest among the MZ twins, a little lower for the dizygotic same sex, lower for the virtual twins, and lower for best friends. Now, for dizygotic opposite sex twins, it's clear they probably have different groups. Full siblings, different ages, so they would have different friends, on down to virtual twins of opposite sex and full siblings of opposite sex. And that is simply mirrored in this slide as well, where I show that sibling pairs that are similar in age and sex and show higher degrees of genetic relatedness tend to have higher degrees of peer overlap than those who do not. And this is important to know because it could be that the shared peer group, if pro-social, could promote healthy development, but if not, could place some siblings at behavioral risk. Some previous studies we've done with the virtual twins have to do with IQ change in degree of similarity from age 5 to age 11, and I've shown a drop there from 0.33 to 0.11. We've looked at body mass index with collaborators at the University of Alabama. We've looked at tacit coordination, a very interesting decision-making situation involving non-negotiated consensus and parenting behaviors. In the future, we're going to look at the child behavior checklist, personality similarity, and social relatedness. I don't have a thank you slide, but I certainly am grateful to the twins, to their parents, and to my colleagues. Thank you very much.